All right, so welcome to another episode. Buckle down, tutoring services. Mr. Thomas is the name, and today we're basically going to be looking at the May-June 2024 Human and Social Biology paper. So let's get right into it. So as you know, we have 6 questions, 2 sections, and you're asked to answer all questions in the area provided. So question one. Question one says Justin. So Justin, who is an amateur boxer, his trainer advises him that in order to increase energy levels, he should consume a diet that contains more complex carbohydrates, such as sweet potato, cassava, which are rich in starch. It says name the test. So you're supposed to name the test that Justin could use to determine the presence of starch in his diet and state the color of the precipitate form if starch is present. So the test would have been the iodine test. And of course, the color of the precipitate. And we're just using PPT for short. Precipitate would be blue-black. And this indicates that starch is present in the food. Part 2 says, identify 2 foods. And if you notice, I always speak about the CXC will bring your attention by capitalizing words, bolding words, so that you are aware of what is expected for you to answer. So 2 foods that are rich in starch other than sweet potato and cassava. So in your listing, sometimes students may make a mistake and put back these 2 items. You'll not be getting any marks for that. So other than, we know that we can consume rice. And even though the question might have asked us for 3, I may give a little bit more. Oats. We can do wheat. And for wheat, we basically have wheat products. So such as flour, things that are, created from the wheat. We also have plantain. That's another source. Yam. Those are some of the items that you would be able to get the starch as well. Corn is also another food that we can get the starch from. So any 2 of those should be good. State which 2 of the following foods Justin should consume for growth and repair. Growth and repair. Once you hear growth and repair, you should be starting to think about protein. All right, sorry about that, capital. So protein. I know protein helps with the repair of tissues and the growth and development. So your chicken would be one of those food from the listing. So chicken is high in protein, and of course your lentil peas. So peas are considered to be legumes, and legumes are plants, pod-bearing plants that are actually high in protein. So these 2 would have been the 2 that you'd select for Justin to consume. So moving on. So part B The students were given a table which shows the number of children in hundreds. So in hundreds who suffer from nutritional deficiency diseases. So that is the lack of a nutrient in the diet. In two countries, countries X and country Y. So we're seeing marasmus. And if you know anything about that, that's a deficiency for protein. So protein, kwashiorkor is also a deficiency of protein in the diet. Night blindness, that's vitamin K. Rickets, that's vitamin D. So these help. You know, night blindness, the vitamin K allows you to see where light is not intense, light is not present. So while at night, you know that there's not a lot of light due to the sun not being present, you're not able to see. And so vitamin K helps with that. When you look at vitamin D, what it does, it helps with the absorption of calcium. And you know, calcium is needed for the strong bones. And of course, a lack of vitamin D will influence. Note that these two would have been considered micronutrients. So micronutrients are considered nutrients that you don't need in large quantities in your body. Instead, the body will need a small amount. It's not saying that they're not important, because even though calcium would have been one of the macro protein, these micronutrients also help with the absorption. As we're seeing right here, the lack of vitamin D is going to create a problem for calcium to be absorbed by your body. And so while they are needed in small quantities, you should still consume food that contain these nutrients. It says on the grid provided in figure 1 on page 7, draw a bar graph to represent the data shown in table 1. So when we look at the table here, we can minimize this a bit. I'm going to minimize. Hopefully we can still see it. And of course, what I will do for this, in this case, I'm going to be placing my diseases on the x-axis. And of course, I'm going to be putting the number of children who have the disease on the y-axis. So I can go by 2 centimeters to every 10,000, because you know they said that it's in 100. So we have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, you want to go up a little bit. And we have 70. So we're doing a bar graph. So we're using bars to represent. So if you can recall, we said that we are using the x-axis for the disease, and I'm just using the letter, so M for marasmus, and of course those, it would have been 65 for country X. So we know somewhere about here. So remember to take your rulers and your pencils to the exam so that you can do your proper drawing of the bar. So what you'll do is to use a different pattern so this would have been X, which is 65, and of course country Y would have been 55. So that's right here. You might be wondering, I'm going to be doing another zigzag line just to differentiate for that of country Y. So this would be for country Y, and this is for marasmus. The kwashiorkor for K, for X it would have been 70. So that's all the way up here. And I'm just going to, sorry, I'm just going to use another line. It kind of look a bit close in terms of appearance. We have 45 for that of country Y. So this is country X again. Usually you can have a key. So that represents country X. And I'm going to change what I do for country Y. So I'm going to just do some lines like this for Y. So we said Y is 45. So right there. Next, we would have had night blindness. Just want to give it a little space. So night and night blindness, we have 35 for country X. And then 25 for country Y. And then finally, we would have had rickets. And for country X, it's 20. And then for country Y, it's actually 30. So that would have been your bar chart depicting the amount of number of children with the diseases for the various countries in question. So let's step back up to that part of the question. So it says we would have done that. That would have been given awarding 4 marks. From your graph, identify the country which had the higher incidence of both marasmus and kwashiorkor. So all we need to do is to look at the numbers. So in comparison, for country X, it was 65 marasmus, and for country Y, it was 55. For kwashiorkor, it was 70. So we see where country X is leading in the occurrence of those 2 diseases. From your graph, identify the country which had the lower incidence of diseases overall. So from the graph, you can use a table as well. But even from the graph, looking at the numbers, what you would have done is to look at the number in the overall case, the occurrence of the diseases, we can add them up. So nonetheless, the table can be a helpful means. So you can add the numbers. When we did the addition, you should have come up with about 155. And remember, this would have been in the hundreds. So 155,000, right? This particular country X would have been 190. So overall, when you look at the representation, we see where it says the lower incidence. Lower incidence, meaning which one had the less? So that would have been country Y. Next, they said state the major micronutrients, and we went through this concept already, so you should be able to identify. We said that the micronutrients in question would have been affecting night blindness and rickets. That is lacking in the diets of the children in country X, and the major micronutrient that is lacking in the diets of the children in country Y. So for country Y, when you look at it, what you're now asked to do is to examine, and we said that night blindness and rickets are the two diseases in question that is associated with the micronutrients. And such, when you look, night blindness is for country X. Most of their children had an issue with that, and that is a link between vitamin K. So country X, it would have been vitamin. So it says name the major micronutrients. So vitamin K. So what they're testing you to see if you know the relationship or know the nutrient deficiency that causes night blindness. And as we spoke about it earlier, it would have been vitamin K. Rickets, of course, is the situation for country Y. 30,000 persons, children, had that disease compared to the 20 in country X. And so we said that rickets is due to a lack of vitamin D, which is responsible for the absorption of calcium. Part C says, suggest one disease that could develop as a result of overeating. And obesity is one such disease where you have accumulation of fat in the body mass. So remember, what happens is that, fat is stored, it's easier to be stored and harder for the energy to be retrieved from it. So the more you store it, it is harder. So one of the things that your diet is very important, what you're consuming, if you're consuming foods high in fat. Now, all living things, question 2, all living things share common characteristics. You would have learned that 7 things are necessary for something to be considered living. It has 7 characteristics, and in this question, they have identified some of the characteristics. So one of the first one, you see the characteristics of life, and they give you the definition. So it says the ability of the organism to detect and react to stimulus, and we say that is irritability. The removal of waste products by the metabolism. So once you hear about metabolism, we know that we're talking about excretion. The removal of metabolic waste. The release of energy from food substances to work in the body. Now, aerobic respiration, and of course the removal of undigested food would have been egestion. And so these are the four characteristics. Just to mention the other few, the other three, we would have had reproduction is one. We also have, in terms of living organism, they should be able to move or, exercise some form of locomotion. And finally, we said that they should be able to feed. So nutrition. You are shown the four main types of tissue found in the human body, labeled A to D, and we have different tissues in our body that are represented by the different cells coming together and working together. Right? So we have the epithelial tissue, and this helps with protection. We have our connective tissue, we also have our nervous tissue, and of course we have our muscle tissue. So the connecting tissue, found in your muscles, they help, well, not in the muscle, we're talking about bone. So when you think about movement, nervous, we're talking about impulses. And then of course the muscle, this is the one for movement, contraction of so these, since this is for the bone, we talk about support. So the question says, using the letter labels only, identify the type of tissue that is responsible for movement and the type of tissue that is responsible for protection of the body surfaces. So movement, it would have been C, and protection would have been A. SEMA, let me bring back up the size. SEMA is a footballer. So footballer, she's a footballer who notices that she tires easily even after very short practice sessions. She researches possible causes of her fatigue and discovers some interesting facts about about certain cell organelles. So identify the cell organelle in Seema's body which may not be working adequately and therefore causing her fatigue. So in terms of energy, mitochondria, and that's plural, or mitochondrion. That would have been for singular. State the process which occurs in the cell organelle. Identify which would prevent Seema's fatigue. So aerobic respiration. So it says write in words an equation that describes the process stated in C2. So one of the things that we need is glucose plus oxygen gives us carbon dioxide and water along with energy in the form of ATP. Seema decides to visit the doctor to be tested to determine the cause of her fatigue. The doctor indicates that her fatigue is not caused by a malfunctioning cell organelle, but is the result of a mineral deficiency in her diet. Suggest the disease that Seema is likely suffering from and state what is occurring in her body. So suggest the disease that Seema is likely suffering from and state what is occurring in her body as a result of the disease. So she's likely the mineral deficiency is iron. Now iron, this is a part, or it helps to form hemoglobin. In the blood. Now hemoglobin, which is responsible for the transport of oxygen. So oxygen as earlier we saw when we wrote the information for aerobic respiration, oxygen is needed for aerobic respiration to occur. So technically what is happening is that because she's lacking iron, and even for a female, Seema could probably be menstruating, and it is normally recommended that females get supplements so that in the time of this deficiency, a matter of fact, we didn't even mention the deficiency, so she's likely anemic. So anemia. So that is due to the lack of iron in the diet, and it influences the hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is what is used to transport the oxygen to the different muscle cells. And so if she's not getting enough hemoglobin, if she's not getting enough iron, she's not producing enough hemoglobin, and hence the amount of oxygen that should be reaching the cells for respiration is limited, thus her fatigue and she becoming tired easily. So it says the human, part D says the human body consists of several organs and organ systems. Identify one organ in the body which belongs to two different organ systems and state the names of the two organ systems. So one of the organs in question is the pancreas. So the pancreas is a part of the digestive system, and also a part of the endocrine. The next one that you could look at is the liver. So the liver is also a part of the digestive system. It is also a part of your endocrine system. Sorry, not the endocrine, the excretory system. You know that the liver helps to deal with toxins in your body. The next one is the ovaries or the testes. And the ovaries or the testes, they are reproductive system, and they also form a part of the endocrine system. They help with the production of hormones, testosterone and estrogen. We also have the kidney. The kidney is a part of your excretory system and also your endocrine system. So any one of these organs could have allowed you to obtain the mark. So question 3 speaks about the definition of the term health. Now, when it comes on to the World Health Organization, it is saying that the absence of diseases is not what health is limited to. We need to have physical, we need to think about physical, mental, and social well-being. Of the individual. So again, it's not limited to just them not having a disease. So someone not having a disease doesn't mean that they're healthy. You have to look at the social, the mental, and the physical well-being of that individual. And then you can say that that person is healthy. As you know, mental illness or mental health has been something that is on the rise in the Caribbean in terms of its importance. We have Mental Health Awareness Day, and so we need to ensure that in our everyday life we check on those. Students are now stressed preparing for the exam. It's not that they have a disease, but the social, you have to be getting up studying and long hours, losing sleep. That's a part of you that makes you healthy. Identify by circling the 2 diseases in the list below which are classified as non-communicable diseases, meaning it's not able to be transferred from one person to the next. And so we're going to be putting, and you have to remember, circling, put or follow the instructions. Students tend to not want to follow in the instructions of the questions. So don't tick, don't put an asterisk. It says circling. So let's deal with the first one. So malaria is caused by a plasmodium, and this plasmodium is actually transmitted by the Anopheles mosquito. Yeah, and so it is transmitted from one person to the next through these vectors. Cervical cancer on the other side is really the HPV virus, and this is not something that can be transferred from one person to the next. This right here is the STI, sexually transmitted infection, caused by a bacterium. And so indeed, if you have unprotected sex, this can be transferred from one individual to the next. Influenza, which includes the common cold, that's a virus. And that is actually able to be transmitted from one individual to the next. While hypertension is high blood pressure, and that in itself is due to genetics, a lifestyle, and even environmental conditions that can lead to you acquiring that disease. So the two that would have been circled would have been cervical cancer, found in females, and of course, hypertension. There are concerns about the increase in global incidence of the viral disease monkeypox. I can tell you that I remember when they spoke about this coming into Jamaica, and this gentleman was jumping through the hospital window and all of that, eluding police and trying to, sometimes we try to prevent the spread. And so one of the things that we will do is to quarantine individuals so that they don't get into contact with other persons. So fever, headaches, muscle aches, chills, rash, these are the signs and symptoms. So from the list above, identify one sign, one symptom experienced by a person who is suffering from monkeypox. Now, when you think about a sign, you think about something that you can actually see, something that is observable, something that is objective. Now, can you see a headache? Can you see somebody and say, oh, that person, I see the headache? So, no, that is not considered. Now, a fever, and you might be saying, but I can't see a fever. But at the same time, you can be objective. You can get a thermometer, and what you can do is to check the temperature, and you're going to be seeing a physical high temperature that indicates a fever, something observable. You can touch the person and you can feel the temperature of that person. Muscle ache? No, I can't see the muscle ache. Chills? No, I can't see the chills. But a rash, definitely we can see a rash on the individual. And some of these, you have to be careful of the media, but pictures were being circulated of persons that had some of these lesions on their body, and they were alluding it to saying that these persons had the disease, monkeypox. Now, symptoms is what the patient will be feeling. So a headache, and bear in mind, while the question, I'm just, giving more. So muscle aches, chills. And so these would have been the responses, any one of those for that question. Next question, part D says, explain 2 ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted societies and economies of the Caribbean. Now, when you think about the society and the economy, definitely we're talking about the social implication, what had to happen, and also the economies. We speak about the aspect of money. So how is it that the COVID-19 pandemic would have caused the country to lose revenue, lose money? So one of the things, and we're talking about the Caribbean. So one of the things that we are known for in the Caribbean is tourism. And our tourism industry was seriously affected because one, for COVID, you had restrictions. You had travel restrictions happening. And so due to these restrictions, persons who would have considered, it started to heighten even during the August and those periods, the December, the height of those periods, persons come to a country like Jamaica to experience our beaches and other flora and fauna and other breathtaking sights that we have here in Jamaica. The Blue Mountains, the Duns River Fall, places like those. But because of the restrictions, our tourism got a major hit. Travel bans were happening because the countries were saying no. Now that we are visiting maybe a third world country, yeah, they might not be so equipped to deal with. So persons were taking a risk going to those countries in case you happen to, which is true, and we don't have the resources like a first world country, and so they were not allowed or were being advised not to visit these countries. We had a harder time dealing with the spread of the disease among our citizens. So travel restriction, tourism got a hit. The hotels had to be closing their doors, and of course, we know the impact of that. These are some of the areas where Jamaicans got their employment, and so persons were being laid off. You didn't have anybody, the Juta tours weren't operating as much, not a lot of tourists to be taken around from here to there. It was just hard along in terms of the tourism industry. One of the other impact, education. And even currently, we hear that in Jamaica, we're thinking about going online due to the rising oil prices. So back then we had to resort to online learning, where again you had a challenge because of the rural areas where persons who did not have a device, didn't have access to internet. The only device was the parent phone, and the parent may had to leave for home if they are somebody who is an essential worker. So there's no means, and so there was a loss of valuable time and knowledge for students who were going to be sitting CXC, who were sitting PEP and other external disease and other external examinations, and also for those who were doing internal. So it really affected the education. We had issues along transport. So transportation got a major hit in terms of persons would have had to now start to adhere to the 6 feet apart. And I remember one of the time, it seems as if we were going to speak about the amount of passengers that the taxi men were able to carry. And so that would again affect their livelihood in terms of the amount of trips and the amount of money that they could be making from one trip. So to ease, banks and other institutions had to now start to adhere and putting in things in place which would have been cost effective. The sanitizing, the other precaution, the thermometers, the the PPT, the protective clothing, and the gloves, and all of those things would have now been a cost that institution didn't put into play. The healthcare system. You know, and we had seen situations where we were not able to have any ventilators, maybe only one ventilator. Persons were very reluctant in terms of, you know, observing the no movement and all of that. So some of them were exposed to the disease, and then the healthcare system. We had our healthcare workers being, when it come on to the social aspect in terms of the society, they were very swamped. They had to be working 9 all day around just to try and ease the burden. Everybody coming in, we would have had a collapse of our system. So any one of these two you can speak about in terms of the impact that it would have had on the Caribbean. Human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, is transmitted primarily through sexual contact or bodily fluids. Explain 2 ways in which individuals may reduce their risk of contracting HIV. Now, one of the things that we want to speak about is the proper use of contraceptive, or like condoms. So these need to be put on properly, and when that is, sometimes it's not just the use of them, but the proper use of these items would have been very important. Not sharing needles. So when you don't share the needles, remember you can have a situation where, especially you know, persons doing drugs. That's why we see a high incidence of HIV among drug addicts, if that's the case, because they don't practice the, you know, the one use of needles. So we need to avoid sharing needles. You can get medication as well. So medication, we have the antiretroviral medication that helps to suppress and reduces the incidence. I remember, you know, growing up, having AIDS was really taboo. Persons will score and you won't get a job. You were discriminated. Now persons are a bit more, you know, they are able to have a little bit more of a length in terms of their life, more comfortable life. Persons who are still in relationships, who have the disease, who take the medication to keep the disease, the virus under control. We basically should do, I have 2 tools, sorry, regular testing. So you have tests that are now speedy. I remember, again, younger, it would have been taking some time for you to get the disease. And then if you have sexual intercourse during a certain time span, the results may not be that accurate. So practicing safe sex is also another thing. Abstinence is the best way to go. And if you do monogamy, where you only have one partner, and of course, we have seen the rise in HIV even in Jamaica as a country, in parts of the country. We've seen the rise, so it's really something that not only as just for an education or just for a subject, young persons, young adults, teenagers needs to be aware of these diseases and how they would have been able to get exposed and know how to protect themselves. State why antibiotics cannot be used to treat HIV infections. Now, if you know anything about antibiotics, they are used to treat, sorry, so diseases that are caused by bacteria, and HIV is caused by a virus, and so it wouldn't have any control over the HIV. So the antiretroviral drug would have been what we need. So question 4, we get a diagram of the heart. We know that when we get a diagram, your right, so your right is the diagram's left. So on this side, this is the left side. All right. So we have some labels. We see A pointing to the aorta. We have the left ventricle, right? So I think I said the incorrect thing. So the left atrium and of course we have these bicuspid valve. So identify the structure of the heart labeled A and the region of the heart labeled B. So we say A would have been the aorta, and then B would have been the left atrium. It says describe the function of the structure of the heart labeled C. Now C is the bicuspid valve, as we mentioned. And this prevents the backflow of blood. So we know on the right side of our heart we get deoxygenated blood, and it will be coming into the right atrium to the ventricle, right ventricle, and then from the ventricle it moves to the pulmonary artery, which is what delivers it to our lung and where it would have gotten oxygenated. Now remember we said that we have double circulation happening in the heart, which means that the blood goes through the heart twice. So the pulmonary vein would have been the the vessel that would have carried the blood, oxygenated blood, to the left side, so the left atria, then the ventricle. Now, speaking back to the bicuspid valve, when the blood enters the right side through the atrium, it's going to be passing through to the ventricle. So to prevent the blood from going back into the atrium, then we have those valves. So the next question says, state the region of the heart, says the sinoatrial node. And this is found on the, or in the right atrium. And so what it really does, it helps with the impulses that is happening in terms of your heartbeat. All right. Certain countries within the Caribbean have a very high incidence of coronary heart disease, CHD. Discuss how one main factor contributes to the development of coronary heart disease. So one main factor is high blood pressure. So high blood pressure. So with high blood pressure, it puts pressure on the inside of your vessels. So it gets damaged due to the pressure that is happening in your blood. Now it will cause inflammation. Inflammation in the walls then lead to, and I'm just giving you the points, inflammation in the walls of your vessels, you are now going to have a situation where it's going to lead to your walls being more permeable to things such as cholesterol. And then cholesterol helps with the building up of plaque. Now, this buildup is what causes the blood or the heart to have to increase in pressure. So when you increase the pressure of the heart, the coronary arteries So they basically, you are now, your body, your heart is now pumping the blood harder than it should, doing more work than it should. So the elasticity of the coronary arch that it used to have, it's going to now lose it. And over time, this can even cause the buildup or complete blockage of the heart, of the vessels, of the artery, which leads to a heart attack. So when you examine hypertension, high blood pressure, and that is even influenced by the amount of salt or in your diet, now inside of your atria, the walls get over time gets damaged, and because it gets damaged, you now have inflammation. To deal with the inflammation of the walls, things are being sent to that walls to help, which allow the walls to become even more permeable to cholesterol. And now cholesterol helps with the building up of plaque within the atrium. And so that causes the opening to become smaller, hence the pressure. Now, when this pressure, the coronary arteries come under intense pressure, they're working overtime, and thus they themselves start to lose elasticity. The more the plaque builds up, the more blockage, and if it blocks it entirely, then you can suffer a heart attack. It says, explain why the walls of the ventricles of the heart may become thicker as a result of coronary heart disease. Now, one of the things that we said that you are now having, so there is a restriction of the passage, thus the walls are closer. So to, what's the word? So to overcome that, the ventricles will have to pump blood much harder or more intense. Now, this intensity, usually the cells in the coronary, in these ventricles, they would technically be replaced. Now, instead of them being replaced, they get enlarged. So usually you have a replacement of these cells, so they are now going to get enlarged to kind of combat that resistance that is being faced due to the presence of the plaque and the other deposits in your blood, in your arteries. So really and truly, there's going to be, an increase in the size or the walls of the ventricles because there's an enlargement of the cells present there to try and pump the blood to overcome that resistance that is there due to the blockage. So just 3 approaches that could be used by government to reduce the incidence of coronary heart disease. Now, one of the things that can, and I always tell students, the government needs, one of the things when it comes on to disease and other things, public education. So allowing persons to understand how their body works. A lot of persons just, and not that they're always wrong, but we grew up on the information from our foreparents or grandparents. Them just tell us if we go drink tea. And mark you, nothing is wrong with consuming a hot beverage at times, but it's not always the answer to everything. So public knowledge, letting persons know what really causes coronary heart disease and how they can go about preventing and helping themselves to treat or correct if they are, diagnosed with this. 2, smoking. Smoking is one of the factors. And even Jamaica, what the government did was to ban smoking in public spaces. So there's a ban on smoking in public spaces. What sometimes the government can do as well is to increase the tax on cigarettes and other, smoking items. This will deter persons from, buying and utilizing it. So public education, banning smoking in public spaces, and that will limit. We can establish nationwide screening. And so this will help with identifying, once you catch a disease, one of the best things that can happen if you happen to have the disease is that we find the doctors find about it easier or early, I should say. And that in itself helps us. This is if you find it too late, you may have a harder chance of survival. The next one is to regulate food consumption. And it's not, and I have to be clear in terms of this aspect. So it's not the amount of food as well, is the type and the nutrients. So even one of the things that the Jamaican government has done, they would have banned certain drinks, certain soft drinks, sodas in the school. These are things that lead to diabetes. Diabetes also leads to hypertension. Hypertension in this case can again lead to a coronary heart disease. So you have factors. So one of the things that you want to do as a government is to regulate or try to, maintain what is being sold, especially to the kids. Over the years, the bag juice, we have something in Jamaica called bag juice. We have suck suck. We have these little sweet items, the chubby, the bigger, the buster. And these items will contribute, they are predisposing factors. They don't necessarily may cause the disease directly, but they may lead to the disease happening in the long run. So as the child gets older, they tend to develop this sense of wanting something sweet. A person say, "I feel like something sweet, feel for something sweet," and this sort of thing is coming from them, maybe from being a child, and so you want to regulate that. It's funny that you might have to make steps because sometimes persons don't want to make the necessary steps themselves. So what they did was to ban the sugary juice or drink that are in the high schools and the primary schools. Now section D speaks to two sources of water pollution. So water pollution can be caused by agricultural runoff. And we're talking about pesticides, fertilizers. We also have industrial waste. Even though they ask for two, we also have things like oil spills. We have things such as mining. So mining also affects plastic. We have this thing now, they're looking at microplastic. So these are some of the wastes. Some of the hotels, we also have sewage. Not even hotels alone, but even homeowners, they have sewage that is leading to the water sources, whether river, lake, pond, you name it, the sea. Figure 4 shows a diagram of an aquatic ecosystem. So we're seeing the phytoplanktons, we're seeing the aquatic plants, we see plant decay, and we see the fish dying. Yeah, and we see the algal bloom. Identify the process that results in the algal bloom in figure 1. And this is caused by eutrophication. So agricultural runoff, especially fertilizers, and not just any, high in the phosphates, and of course the nitrates. So the phosphates and the nitrates, these fertilizers help to boost the nutrients required for the algae to bloom. So they have an explosion in their population. So the next question speaks about that. It says, explain how the process identified in 1 results in the death of the fish. So we're just going to talk about it on the diagram. So one other thing is, if you happen to have some form of agricultural farm, the farmer is practicing contour farming here, and he utilizes fertilizer. The fertilizer, which is high in nitrogen, gets into this pond, this aquatic system. What it will do is to allow the algae to be happy. Algae, as I say, yeah, we love what go on right here, so I'm happy. I get all of these nutrients. So they're going to have an explosion in their population. Now, if you notice, you're seeing it right here, but it's going to be extending all over the pond. Now, the rays from the sun is going into the pond to the aquatic plants, and it is also being used by the phytoplanktons. Those are plant-like things that also photosynthesize. Now, what is happening is that the algal bloom is going to create a barrier. So it's going to block the sunlight from reaching the aquatic plants along with the phytoplanktons. So you know what that caused? That caused a reduction or complete stopping of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process by which these aquatic plants and the phytoplanktons make their food, which is glucose. But it's not the glucose that is going to cause the death of the fish. Not the lack of glucose. It's the fact that they also release oxygen as a byproduct. Now, oxygen, O2, is going to be within this pond. And so when the water passes over the gills of the fish, they are able to extract the oxygen and use it for themselves for respiration. Here's a problem. These plants are not photosynthesizing. The phytoplanktons are not photosynthesizing. So there's going to be a depletion in oxygen. While there's a depletion, the phytoplanktons and also the aquatic plants start to die. The plants are going to get decayed. They're going to break down by bacteria, which requires oxygen. So even when you have the small amount of oxygen remaining in the pond, the bacteria is utilizing it, competing with the fishes to help break down the plants and the other things that have died. This results in further depletion of the amount of oxygen that is available. Hence, the fish doesn't have any means of acquiring oxygen to respire, so they eventually die. When everything starts to die and the oxygen starts to, decrease even further until there is none, it will also have an impact on the algal bloom and they will start to die and their numbers will reduce and the system will start to take its time going back to normal where phytoplanktons and aquatic plants start to come back because sun is now going to be able to enter. So remember, it is really caused by the increase in nutrients within the pond, preferably phosphate and nitrates coming from a farm fertilizer. The fertilizer caused an explosion in the algal bloom. They block the sunlight. Plants cannot photosynthesize to produce oxygen. There's lack of oxygen. The microorganisms, the bacteria, now starts to utilize this small amount of oxygen to, to decay, to help to decompose the things that are dying in the pond, and thus eventually no oxygen is going to be there for the fish, so the fish will eventually die. So that is what we want to put at this point. So we said that increase in nutrients. And we said phosphate and nitrate. So that's one. Causes algal bloom, which blocks sunlight from aquatic plants So aquatic plants reduces the production of oxygen. They eventually die, decomposes, break down dead matter, which uses more oxygen. Fish has limited oxygen, hence they die. All right? It says table 3 shows the percentage of pollutants in the air of a city and a rural region. So we see carbon dioxide 60, rural in the city, rural 25, sulfur 15, 4, solid particles, dust, etc. 8, 1. Outline 2 reasons why the percentage of carbon monoxide is much higher in the city than in the rural region. So 1, there are more, what do you call it now, motor vehicles. So more motor vehicles in the city, hence, you know, one of the things that's coming out of the exhaust is carbon monoxide. 3, we have more, I would say more industries. So industrial activities. So we have more factories and those things that are in the city than in the rural area. Explain why the percentage of carbon monoxide is much higher than the percentage of other pollutants in the rural region. So in the rural region, would have agricultural So the rural area would have agricultural activities. And so from that, you may have tractors available. You may have the burning of coal. Same thing in Jamaica, we call it coal skill. Some man burn coal skill to get coal. Some other activities, slash and burn. A method popularly used by farmers to clear the land. It's much faster. If it's not done in a controlled way, though, it creates a problem. So these activities are normally present in the rural areas. So you find that the more, if you're going to have any form of pollutant, it's going to be the carbon monoxide due to the fact of the agricultural activities. So recommend 3 ways in which the high level of pollution in the cities can be reduced. Eco-friendly transport. So we can invest in electrical vehicles that will be more eco-friendly. These vehicles will, you know, industries such as factories can go to alternative energies. So we can go to solar, water, things that are not going to cause that high output of pollution. We can have policy, regulation. So some of these companies, what the government will do is to regulate their pollution output. So set standard that they are not able to release more than a certain amount of pollutants for a given period. We have urban planning. We see if you're from Jamaica, one of the things that I am looking forward to is that park in Portmore. So usually these schemes that are being created now, when you're looking at the housing industry and planning, one of the things that they need to incorporate is some form of rain harvesting, some form of green space. So it's not, even if you're building a community, it's not just house everywhere. You must have some form of green space where you're going to have that area not being consumed by concrete and all those structures. And that will help. Yeah? So even all of these, you're putting together, even along the transport line, we can talk about carpooling, energy saving bulbs on a level, energy saving devices, equipment that you can install. Name one excretory product from each of the following. So from the lung, we have carbon dioxide. We also have water vapor. From the skin, we have urea, we have salt, we have water. From the kidney, we also have urea, we have ammonia, we have salt. Say which blood vessel carries blood to the kidney. So when you hear about the kidney, start to think about the renal. So kidney, renal, heart, pulmonary. So renal artery. Identify the structures in the kidney in which ultrafiltration and reabsorption takes place. So ultrafiltration, we're talking about the Bowman's capsule, the glomerulus, in terms of reabsorption, we have the proximal and distal convoluted tubules. We have the loop of Henle. So we know that these are where reabsorption, selective reabsorption occurs. Manuel and Sonia want to investigate the components of their urine. Each of them collects a urine sample and performs the Burette test and the Benedict's test on the individual samples. Table 4 shows Manuel and Sonia's observation. So we're seeing for the Burette test no color change. For the Benedict's test though, we're seeing a red. For Sonia, for the Burette test, we're seeing a pinkish color, and then we see blue. So one of the things that you want to talk about is what each of these tests is doing. So for the Benedict's test, we're testing, this is for protein, and this is for reducing sugar. Such as glucose. So using the data from the table, state the conclusion that can be drawn about Manuel's and Sonia's urine and suggest the disease for which Manuel and Sonia are at risk. So definitely Manuel has sugar, which is glucose, in his urine. And that's not good, because that simply means that his kidney, something is wrong where the glucose in the urine, glucose getting in the urine. No. Sonia has a pinkish color for the Bury test, and that is indicating that she has protein in her urine. So Manuel might be suffering or at risk for diabetes, and of course she's going to encounter kidney failure. Santo is badly injured at work and quickly experiences severe blood loss. He arrives at the emergency room with low blood pressure. Explain how Santo's blood will respond in order to increase his blood pressure. All right, just realizing that, it was writing and not recording. So the medulla sends a message. Yeah? A message to the heart so that it will beat faster. And one of the things that will do, that will raise the blood pressure, because the faster the heart is beating, the arterioles will do what we call vasoconstriction, and this is actually becoming narrower. And by becoming narrower, it is going to build up a resistance to the blood flow, and this will actually raise the blood pressure. Now, ADH is also going to be produced. And what this will do is to tell the kidney to reabsorb more water. And this will increase blood volume and, of course, thus increasing blood pressure. So here we come to the end of this session. We want to give a shout out to our sponsors. We want to mention True Petal Floral. You can link them on Instagram. Mother's Day is coming up, Teacher's Day, for any other occasion, a birthday, family event, you can get them to do floral arrangement. And they don't utilize artificial flowers, they also have natural flowers for your floral arrangements. We have Elite Detailing. Now Elite have a wide variety of lights that can improve your vision while driving. They also do detailing, and that helps with the appearance of your vehicle, both on the inside and out. And you can check them out on Instagram and also TikTok, YouTube. We have D&J Document Center. They do more than just create documents. They do a lot of booklets. They help with homework assistance, and they do printing, designing, and other documentation. For me, I just want to say all the best on your exams. You probably may be watching this video after a couple of years when this video is posted, but this is directly done for the students who would have going to be participating in the 2026 examination. So we want to wish you all the best. If this video was helpful, if you have questions, feel free to share the video. Give us your take in terms of how the explanation was. Give us your feedback, and do enjoy your summer when it comes, and I'm looking forward to hearing students making mention that this video was helpful and that they have been successful in getting a 1, 2, or 3 in human and social biology. Thank you. That's it.